The US innovates, the EU regulates, and China imitates. And I think that applies to these models. And I've seen that play out with everything we're talking about. I don't think EU is ever going to be a major player because of all the heavy regulation that they're going to do. The US is going to do what it always does and just let people throw a ton of money at the problem. China is going to continue to release models like DeepSeek that are going to undermine that investment.
And we're up. All right. Given our topic today, need to say the date. So as of right now, it's November 24th when we're recording this. Not quite sure exactly when we'll drop, but we're talking about current news a little bit. So wanted to give you that context. We're hoping to get into the developer space for AI. What's going on in AI for software development, and just kind of have a generalized conversation about that. We've got Chris Boyd back. He was a very popular guest. So
I'm not surprised. He was probably one of the most popular guests we've had, the only guest we've had, but is definitely leading the charts on the views for his episode. I don't know if I should take that personally, if it was the lack of me or Chris is here, but I guess we'll use this as our
we'll test it out. We'll test it out. We'll see.
There you go.
If things stay strong, then we're good.
If it's just me being featured,
exactly.
Or if it's just the holiday weekend.
Maybe it's the beard. Maybe I'll grow a beard.
There it is.
Got a beard, Max.
Yeah. So Chris, just again to introduce Chris, Chris is the founder CEO of Aptitude, which among other things is primarily a, what do you call yourself? Like a mobile design studio, like an agency, mobile development
agency. Yeah.
Thank you. There we go. Very, very good. So Chris has been doing this forever since 2012?
Founded in April of 2012. Yep, in New Orleans.
Wow, very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So we're excited to talk to you, and we've obviously all known each other for a while, and it's just good to get different perspectives as we're working inside of a software startup and also with big enterprise customers. And then how are you experiencing some of these similar things in the companies that you work with? So kind of jumping right into the AI piece, right? When mobile came out, we had there's an app for that. And now there's a CLI for that.
Everywhere.
So I think we should start with what's your favorite CLI and why? And then we'll go from there. So Chris, why don't you lead us off? And then I think we all know what Jason's is, but.
Blame Chris for that one.
Yeah, I'm glad to take the blame. So right now, what I've been doing, and just to give you guys some background, I was completely brand new to agentic coding development until around June of this year, June 2025. We talked about this in the last episode, but I have kind of a threshold where something has to have enough buzz from enough different sources before I started paying attention to it. Otherwise, your head is filled with noise and you're constantly chasing different tools. And I know a lot of developers that just are constantly switching to the new thing every week. So I try not to do that. But back in June, maybe it was late May, Claude Code started to really get on my radar. And I was a huge Claude fan as a chat AI, but hadn't used Claude Code yet. And it had been around since, I believe, February. But then I finally started testing it out and I was like, oh, okay, this is the new stuff. This is major. I gave it a prompt to create basic web app and it did it flawlessly, was able to get it to deploy with GitHub. It was really impressive. And that really kind of kicked everything off for me. Used Claude Code exclusively through, I want to say about August when the new Codex came out. And then with ChatGPT, OpenAI, with Codex, they really took some of the flaws of Claude Code and some of the lack of polish and really created this amazingly polished tool, especially with the VS Code extension. So since August, I've been using that almost exclusively and I've been really impressed with the results. Still a huge fan of Claude Code for certain chats, anything creative, anything legal. You definitely want to use Claude, at least have Claude proofread a legal document, things like that. But Codex and ChatGPT have been my go-tos right until around this time last week when our friends at Google dropped Gemini 3 Pro. So now I'm kind of got to shift gears again. Jason?
Yeah, it seems like it's catching up with everything. There's something new coming out every week. I'm still on the Claude Code bandwagon. I'm typically a harder to change something new. Claude's been my bro for a while now. He does a good job, and I was burning some credits at Cursor with Anthropic for a bit. A story for another time. Lesson learned is don't use your own token.
We'll get. I think we can get into that story during the Model Wars.
Maybe another time.
That's a good one.
It is one. I don't know if it's good, but it's one. But yeah, I still like it. With the 4.5 of Sonnet, it's been a good workhorse model. I haven't used Opus much since then because I can tune the prompt enough and it's still quick. whereas Opus was taking a bit longer. And for me right now, being that I can tweak the prompts, I've got skills. I'm even running open memory in the background where it's storing up memories, and that speed and that context that it's loading in every single time it loads a new window has been huge help. I could probably squeeze out a little bit more by switching over to Gemini or Codex, but I've got a pretty solid workflow that I can get a lot done, and even in parallel, running multiple tabs, and I can run multiple sessions. I've got multiple Git work trees for the same project. So I've got a pretty good system set up with Claude Code right now where I'd have to start over from scratch with the other ones. Not that they're bad by any means. I'm pretty excited to see what Gemini 3 comes out with and how that advances once my credits reset.
I think the workflow piece is really critical, right? Especially with Claude Code, because when you have a well-designed workflow, especially with Claude Code, because it's the most mature of all of them, it can be really powerful. And I think the workflow way to do things with Codex, and especially with Gemini, it's not quite as developed. So that's a great point, that Claude has a community around Claude Code that has kind of defined best practices from experience that you can build on. And I think that's a huge benefit.
And the skills and hooks have been really, really helpful, where I can now, on the start of a new terminal session, and I ask it a question before anything happens, it will go, and instead of having to parse through the entire architecture of my app, the skills will, or the hooks, I think it's the hook I have set up, will go in and check my open memory database. I've got a vector database running locally that will go and query and say, what's the architecture for this app? Instead of having to parse the entire thing every single time, it just gets a quick rundown that's now been updated after every single task. It will then dump that into the vector database so that it's just a quick query every time I load something new. So now it's pretty optimized as far as getting architecture redone. I can open up a new terminal, and instead of having to start from scratch and give it all this context and say, look at this, look at this, look at this, it does that on demand now. Whenever I ask it a question, it'll get that rundown. But then afterwards, it'll say, here's what I did. Here's the things that I changed. So you've got that memory and the history going on. So you open up a new terminal and ask a new question. You're not starting from ground zero. You're starting from where you just on another terminal session ended.
Yep. And that's huge. Context is key. And I think that's the moat for each of these vendors is making sure that the context experience is nailed and you don't have to do all these crazy jerry-rigging things to get your context from one session to another.
Right.
See, it's funny. I don't have that. I don't do anything that sophisticated. I'm like way more simple, but I don't have that problem either. Like I feel like, and maybe it's because my workflow is so different. I don't like one-shotting things, right? Like I basically am using it probably the way you're supposed to do it like a year ago, and I just haven't caught up. But largely, I give it incremental instructions and let it do its thing, and I kind of go from there. The broader context and the bigger shifts you guys are talking about, I'm just not there. On the CLI side, I've got some weird block on Claude Code. You guys have been trying to get me to use it forever. I can't figure out why, but like I just can't. I'll use Anthropic's models, but for some reason, I just have this completely irrational blocker against using that tool for some reason.
And I have the opposite for the sidebar in VS Code. I don't like using the Claude Code chat. It's not as good. I don't know what it is, but it's just to me not as good.
I like the diff. I want the visual diff. Like that's the problem for the CLIs for me. It's very hard to read the code that they're making changes in it. And Jason, you and I just talked about this a couple of days ago. You can set up a Git tree workflow and all those different things. So you can use your native Git diffing to do that. Again, too sophisticated for me apparently, but I'd like the ease of the cursor stuff. But I haven't used Claude Code. I haven't used Cursor CLI. I just use the sidebar and the agent mode and all that type of stuff. Playing with OpenAI and even the new Gemini stuff, what I found interesting, I was trying to do a couple of specific tasks. What I found was that OpenAI seemed to be a little smarter, but it was really annoying because it made me approve every little thing. So I was having it like jump through and like do a bunch of data analysis on some integration data and like how do we figure out how to map certain things and all the different types of stuff. And because the docs from that particular product weren't very good. And so it's like every little query it's running on my local database is like, can you do this? Can I do this? Can I do it? And it made it super painful. Whereas Gemini was more intelligent about when it asked for approval, but it wasn't as clever in its way of solving the problem. So it's, these trade-offs you get between these tools, it's pretty wild.
For me personally, when I'm using Codex, I put it on full permissions mode. I don't even have it ask for anything. It just goes to town. And it stays within the workspace that you've given it permission to. And you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I did
now,
that.
Claude,
we got our production credentials locked out by that once. So
ouch. On Codex?
I won't say which product it was, but it went a little nuts. It was doing some test calls and it invented some calls that didn't exist and authentication structures that didn't exist. It's pinging this, this third party with like bad calls, and it didn't take long before our credentials were all locked out. It was a whole thing. It was just a nightmare. So I'm a little more careful about like full mode is a little terrifying.
A little bit. Well, since you asked, I did want to show you guys something that I just made as a demo of Codex in full mode, just to kind of give you an example. If you go to bestpodcastepisodeever.com, I have a web app that I created for this episode before it existed. And it took exactly 30 minutes from start to finish using Codex. So I thought I'd give you guys an example.
That was real. No, the real thing is that because I wasn't there, because I'm not on the page. So I am truly offended.
Scroll down.
Oh my goodness.
You're in the shorts.
Oh,
okay.
Oh my goodness. Oh, look at this. You're a crazy person.
So, a little bit of background. Duncan and I had asked for an outline, and I had this going already, and it was already done. But then I was able to take the outline that you gave me maybe 10 minutes before the episode began and popped it into Codex and said, hey, update all the content to reflect the outline. So it's very accurate, if you might notice, the topics that we have planned for the episode. Wow. And I used Nano Banana to actually create YouTube short stills before they exist from the episode.
That's creepy. Look at this. You have the whole thing. Oh man. See, now we seem a lot less organic because like our agenda's here on the thing, but this is cool. You used Cursor CLI for that or Codex, you say?
Codex. That was all Codex, awesome. VS Code extension using the new Codex model, Codex 5.1 Max. And it did pretty well. And then the images was Gemini Nano Banana.
Yeah. Very cool. Do you have an API workflow for that, or did you just go into the console or go into the web and be like, hey, make this?
VS Code extension. I bought the domain, I want to say probably around noon. Like the idea pops in my head. I was like, haha, I'm going to do it.
Well, it's just kind of crazy just that something so quick popped in your head. You bought the domain at 12. It's online before we even kicked off today at around 1 o'clock. And so it's an hour from idea to production with a full, which really shows the power of what these things can do. For just a quick idea, you can now get something in production, quote unquote, with just an idea, validate it, and say, is this a best podcast episode ever? I don't know.
It's bite-sized things. It's not going to run your entire company, right? But it's bite-sized, cool little experiments like that you can deploy in 30 minutes that at least have, from concept to, I always tell clients this all the time, just get something to where it's out of your head, write it on a napkin, send an outline, but get it to where it's actually articulated, because that's like 50% of the battle.
People are visual with these things. They see it. They need to, get their hands on it instead of just seeing a text PRD. Scratch that. Just get something. It's the same amount of effort, but now you can see it.
This morning,
you can feel it.
We did this morning, right? Like
exactly.
We were going through, like we've been having this conversation about something for off and on, maybe this kind of feature that like every once in a while I would sort of bring up and like, oh, we need to do this. And
I never got it. I could never really.
It never really clicked for anybody because it was like, huh? Because again, what I was asking for, the words I was using and what I wanted to do were not perfectly matched together because there wasn't really a good way to do that. But I spent a little bit of time in Figma Make, which has actually gotten way better. And I'm like, okay, hey, build this out. And now, great. Now we've got a prototype to talk about. My idea was actually better expressed than I could do verbally because it was a complex kind of visualization that I just wasn't able to articulate. And then it's like, okay, cool. Now we can have a much more meaningful conversation about what we actually want to build. We're not going to use that code that Figma's generating because, like, no shade to them, but that's not what we're going to productionize in our app. But it saved us many, many hours of clarity and like bringing things up. Like that type of stuff is crazy. And we've got features in the app, in our product, we won't say which ones, that got from idea to production in a few days, relying heavily on this stuff. It does happen and it is cool. I think it's David Sachs that keeps saying it, like the AIs are for the administration right now. He's like, these AI is not end to end, it's middle to middle. And I think when we think about putting AI in our products, even like our latest thing that we put out, we have a VS Code extension actually to plug into our product, right? Oh, we're going to be agentic. We're going to solve all the problems agentically. Like maybe you will, that's fine. But we're trying to like incrementally like, hey, we're going to give you a really good prompt so you can enhance your workflow. That's how we think about the products, is how do we help you use AI to enhance your workflow, not create brand new asynchronous workflows. I mean, I think we'll get there eventually, but that's not what we're focused on, at the moment from a product dev standpoint.
At Aptitude, we've always had something we called time to first build. And it was time from begin the project to mock-ups to actually having a build on the client's device. And with this kind of example, like bestpodcastepisodeever.com, with agentic coding, it takes it from something that might take a month to literally it was an hour. Now, this was a basic example, simple idea. There weren't any mock-ups. There wasn't any product vision. It was just me being a smartass. But it is an example of how hyper-charged things can be with agentic coding and how much you can get from point A to point B.
No, for sure. So one last thing on the CLI thing, like, where do you think it goes? Do you think the CLIs just continue to dominate? Or do you think it flows back into a UI? Like, obviously, I'm an example. I kind of use both, but I sort of tend towards the UI. How do you see that trend going for yourself personally? And then, like, as the tools get better and better?
Well, let's just put it this way. Vim is still used by quite a few developers, and people are still extending it. I just saw somebody who wants to build an AI autocomplete for NeoVim. There's still people who just love the old tools. They just love the nostalgia. I don't know.
The guys that learned on DOS in the 90s or earlier, and they can't get past it.
I'm guilty of that.
It's like you just have your first love, and it just is what it is.
I have a pretty good NeoVim setup. I get it. So I understand where they're going from that.
I don't get you people. You guys are all weird.
I wouldn't, like, I haven't used it in years, but I would never want to use
too. I mean, come on.
I would never want to use any of those AI tools ever since. Like, I just wouldn't do that. I would never want to retrofit it. Those two don't really live in the same world, in my opinion. Your question is, will we still have the CLIs? I think we will, because I think there's still those people who just want the raw, the pure, the straight to the source, the bare metal of, I don't want this clunky interface in my way. I just want to just use this tool because I'm familiar with the terminal. And we still live in the terminals. We still have to run commands there. So I still want to be there instead of having to now learn a new interface, now use this. Some human designed this with what they think is the best experience. Whereas I just like using the terminal because it's a feed. It's very, very simple. There's no UI there. It's just text on a board, and text on a board is valuable. The Bloomberg terminal still is very simple UI because it works. It's just raw. There's no, well, should I have this drop down here? Should I have the drop down there? No, it's just text on a board. Make the best out of it. So that people really put the experience.
With Jason, but for different reasons. I think LLMs, as long as they are the go-to for AI, which I don't think they're always going to be, but for now and for foreseeably the next 5 years, you're going to be interacting with LLMs when you're interacting with AI. So they're inherently text-based. And when we try to wrap a user interface around something that is basically like a probability equation at its heart, you're going to get weird results. So I think there's going to be the core CLI text-based experience for an LLM, period. Now, what Google's doing with anti-gravity, I think, is a step in the right direction, where it's taking the concept of an AI, it's taking the CLI, but it's giving you this layer that is both multiple agents and kind of a command center that you can do really cool stuff with. But I do think, Jason, to your point, that there's still a terminal. When you run a web debug server, you're running it in your terminal and it pops up there. There's still a database behind every front end. I think there's always going to be that.
It's so weird to me. Like, terminals are shell scripts, man. Like, it's like you run a command and it runs. Like, it's such an interesting thing for it to be this long-lived, interactive. It's just not how I grew up using the terminal, which is fine. It's so foreign. It's interesting.
But yeah, I think CLI is here to stay, but you're going to have layers on top of that experience that make it disappear for the more consumer level experiences.
I agree. It's a step in the right direction. I like it. I just burned through my credits too quickly, so I wasn't able to use it very much.
Same.
I think it does hold a lot of promise to a small step towards getting away from as many people in the terminal. I'm stuffing my entire app in the sidebar. No, they made the entire IDE their product. Whether it's a VS Code fork or not, that doesn't matter. It's the framework for building their product on top of it. But the point is that that is their entire product. So they can put the experience elsewhere instead of trying to stuff the entire thing in a sidebar like Anthropic would. It's putting everything in a sidebar. I think in the small chunks like that, like anti-gravity, but Cursor exists for the same reason. It's an entire product in an IDE. That's anti-gravity. It's the same concept overall. Yeah, whether or not it's one server, it doesn't really matter. It's the idea that the IDE is a product, not the sidebar.
I just thought it was funny
model.
How people are trolling Google for essentially ripping off Windsurf. That they bought the guys, they hired the key people, and then just cloned the product. Yeah. And even to the point where, like, there's still code artifacts in there with their old company name and stuff. That I just thought it was funny.
But the models are becoming harder and harder to train. It's going to take longer and longer to get a more advanced model out. So where's the differentiator? It's the product. And we've got all these resources sitting around. I can't have people just sitting idle. I'm not going to do another CLI. I've got to have some sort of product differentiator. I was actually asked by one of the Anthropic investors of, where do I see a Cursor versus Anthropic? Well, it's in the product differentiation. You can swap out, like Cursor proves it. You can swap out a model and have the same results as far as the experience goes, because it's just a bolt-on new backend. So where they've differentiated is that they have a better user experience, better developer experience. And I think that's going to be that next layer of making it easy to move around and swap out different backends, different models, but yet you still can code the same way. And so that's where I see like the anti-gravity being beneficial, because you have the full suite of Google models behind it. And
I just want to point out,
advancing there.
Anthropic's CEO 6 months ago said that by now, it's November 2025, 90% of all coding would be written by AI. And we're nowhere near that, right? So there's still a lot to figure out.
Yeah, well, I mean, those guys say things for fundraising purposes and stuff like that. So we'll have to give them a grain of salt. It's funny, like the whole Cursor. So getting into kind of the model wars conversation, right? Like, as you mentioned, we've got Codex, we've got Claude Code, and now we've got, Gemini, CLI, and anti-gravity, and there's Jules out there too. What's interesting is I prefer Cursor, because the thing I like about Cursor is the model variability. And this is actually an advantage GitHub has as well. GitHub doesn't have their own model. Cursor now has their own model, Composer, which actually isn't bad. I found it to be very speedy, and it didn't seem like a quality drop off from the Anthropic models when I was using it before I ran out of credits for this month. But, it's an interesting thing. Like, as you think about it, Cursor just raised an enormous amount of money, right? Like $3.3 billion at a $30 billion evaluation. When they're just an app layer on top of those things, it's wild. But it's interesting also to think about like the data that they do have in terms of which models are working, which ones people want to use. And obviously they're probably near or at the top of the model consumption for those companies, right? In terms of their customers, right? Like those guys have got to be a huge customer of Anthropic and OpenAI and Gemini and all this different things. So it's interesting what they'll learn, how they'll be able to make the tools better. Is there enough of a moat to justify a $30 billion valuation? I don't know about that, but good luck to them. It is really interesting. I think there is something to the app layer of when you're not hawking your own model, but you're building the experience to consume models, that vertical integration isn't there. You might lose a little bit of economics, right? Because you got to pay for that extra piece. But will that end up winning? Will there be a lot of products that are model agnostic and the model layer, the app layer become different? It's an interesting thing for the investors probably to all figure out. A bunch of guys in Silicon Valley will make a bunch of money and lose a bunch of money on that question. Put it to you guys, right? We did just see Gemini drop. You guys, we talked about it already. I think you guys were saying that there's an expected drop from Anthropic. The OpenAI 5 was kind of a disappointment, right? Like everybody was like, wasn't really that much of an improvement. It was more of like a routing efficiency play as opposed to a actual thing. The thing with Google was interesting because it was fully trained on their chips too.
TPUs instead of GPUs.
Exactly, right? So what's going to happen? What's going to play out? Is the curve continuing to flatten, or is Google showing that the curve is still going and the laws of just throwing compute at training will produce better results? I don't know what you guys think.
They've been training this for a while. So the Gemini 3 launch, that has been going on for quite a bit. We don't know how long, but it's not something that they just started last month. So I think it's too early to tell whether or not it's going to flatten out. I think if you look at the release schedule, you'll start to see either smaller, like the 5.1 release from OpenAI, or the 5.2 versus a whole new major version bump to a 6. I think you'll start to see more of the small iterative chunks with new product experiences. Then maybe use the models better. Maybe they launch it as a small improvement, but they're really maybe using the same models under the hood. So I think we'll start to see more of that down the road as the models become harder to train, as they become harder and longer to build that. So I think we'll start to see a shift to better product experiences instead of purely just a new model with the same experience. So I think they'll start to diversify into new things.
Yeah, I think they're running out of ways to power what they need to do to keep the scale going, right? In order to keep having the same leaps.
You mean like
progress.
electrons, like electricity?
Literal electricity power. They're going to run out of traditional US grid, and they're already trying to counteract that by going outside the US. And you see all sorts of things like in Venezuela. But I think ultimately LLMs don't scale without a massive amount of compute. And eventually you're just going to reach a point where that's just not feasible without some sort of breakthrough in power like fusion or return to nuclear, which Microsoft is already kind of approaching, right? But those things
Or a
take
data center in
time.
space, like I've heard.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some crazy stuff I heard on some new capabilities. I mean, inference is getting cheaper and cheaper, right? And
Yes.
I think both from an electricity standpoint and a cost standpoint and cycle standpoint, obviously the training build out is enormous, but inference is getting cheap. And I think we're still, to your point, Chris, like we're still in the LLM phase. Once we go to the SLM phase, then I think that gets more interesting, right? When you have for lack of a better word, like let's say you're coding, right? Instead of an LLM, you use very language specific. Instead of one LLM, there's 400 of them that are all really good. And then you've got one thing that's routing to decide which one to use in this context. And those smaller ones
in
are
your specific coding language, right?
Exactly. They're way more efficient, right? The training stuff obviously is a thing, but it'll be interesting the long-term efficiencies of all this stuff. And if you're listening to anybody talk about the tech world, the energy thing is obviously going to be a bottleneck if they don't get on it. Although there's some interesting possibilities, right? Like obviously nuclear or solar's there. Elon went on some conference and was talking about how if you got 1 million Teslas out there, they've all got state-of-the-art AI chips. Just if they're not driving, let them offload inference or offload training to them. Kind of like, remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, they did this with PlayStation, right? Like the connected PlayStations, like you could sign up to be part of some like distributed supercomputer thing where it could use your GPU.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
it's like the same kind of concept.
You used to do that on your home PCs. You could rent your unused compute to somebody who was rendering 3D movies. But one thing that we haven't really touched on is that it's not just the electricity, it's not just the compute, it's the inputs to the models to train what is the current thing. That's where I think Grok has been a really good avenue for their model, is that you can see what people are talking about right now. And it can research the right now instead of researching things that were in 2024. I still get a response from a model that says the year is 2024 because that's just what it thinks at that time. But
when it was trained.
And that's where you've seen where OpenAI might be branching out into a physical device. Whether or not the rumors are true or not, I don't know.
They're true.
They want you to believe it.
They're going to need more data. They're going to need more inputs to say, what do people talk like? How do I make it sound more current human, more, November 24th, 2025 human instead of whatever people were talking about last year, or the phrasing or the inflections or whatever it is. But you rewind 10 years even, you would see a different type of a mentality of a thought or a speech patterns. 50 years, the same thing. So now they don't want to have their models to be speaking like a 10-year-old style. They need current. And they need that data. They need to know what people are talking about.
Well, you bring up a really, really good point, right? Like, why isn't Grok in the conversation that we just had? Their models are good by all accounts. I use Grok for personal stuff. We could ask ourselves this question, but also just generically, the industry is not really adopting it for business use cases, right? Like they're doing Grokopedia. It's a kind of a fun LLM chat bot. They've got their silly companion thing, which is a little weird and creepy, but we'll leave that alone. But it's obviously impressive. Is it just the political dimension and like the diciness around it being tied to X and complexity there? I'm curious what you guys think. It's one of those things that it doesn't get any real credibility as a business use case, including us. I've never really thought about it until we were talking about it, but it's like, man, why don't we talk about it? Because it is good. Why don't people adopt it? There's something blocking it.
It's not as good as people make it out to be, in my opinion. I've not really liked it that much. I've tried it a few times, but the results weren't great.
Perform at the same level as like a ChatGPT or a Gemini or even a Claude. But I think in some ways Elon is just radioactive.
You mean for coding or for general LLM, like general chat? Like, are you distinguishing between those?
Yeah, coding. It's just in general, like the kind of personal benchmarks that you use when you're testing out an LLM, especially one that's new. I haven't found it to be as impressive. Now, they do have the market cornered on current events. You can loop Grok into a tweet and have it give you feedback. You can take any kind of tweet that somebody's put out and press a button and have immediate context, like, what the hell is this meme? That kind of thing. I think that's very useful, but that's a feature. That's not necessarily unique to the model, right? I do think it makes
the Twitter X experience a lot more helpful and interesting, but it's not its own thing.
It provides an important amount of context. I do think one sleeper agent that everybody is just kind of ignoring right now is Meta. Meta really dropped the ball with Llama 4. I think it was because Zuckerberg had his chief of AI, Jan, who was really... He was really against LLMs. He thought LLMs were kind of not the way to go. And I think he got fired because of that position, right? And then Meta
he was actively undermining the strategy of the enterprise.
Right. They went and kind of sent that guy away and then poached a ton of talent from OpenAI and others. And I think they're building something that's probably going to be pretty massive. Now, knowing Zuckerberg, he's going to use it to maximize ad engagement and some sort of other nefarious thing. But I do think that they're going to come up with a model. It's not going to be open source. It's going to be proprietary and it's going to be powerful. They're building a data center in rural Louisiana that's the size of Manhattan. And that's going to be huge.
Why do you think they're going back to closed models?
I think they're going to completely abandon the open model that they had approached. I think that was the previous AI chief's approach, and I don't think it worked well. I think they created a great ecosystem with OpenLlama, and I've used OpenLlama to test things out. It's fantastic. It's more of an academic pursuit, right? For the enterprise, I think you're going to want something more like what Gemini, OpenAI, and Claude are doing. You have an API, you have this walled garden, people pay to get into it. Do you disagree?
So you think that none of the American companies are going to put out good open source models? We're just going to completely abandon open source to China. You think that that'll be the next couple of years?
Yeah, I do. I think there will be awesome open source models coming out, but I think there'll be an afterthought for the proprietary models.
Or a distilled version of it. There'll be like a simplified version of it. It won't be the full thing. Because that's the differentiator. You have a good model, you're not going to open source this great model. You've put millions and millions of dollars into training this thing. Why am I going to open source it?
They're too expensive and there's too much at stake that I think
they're going to get more and more expensive as time goes on too. And they're going to have proprietary data. Facebook is going to use all their gigantic reach of Facebook, of Instagram, their Meta glasses, that there's going to get real-time streaming in from what's on the street right now that isn't posted on Twitter. They have the video glasses that they're having now. They're going to adopt more and more inputs. So they're not going to give that data away for free. No way. They're just not going to do that.
I think that kind of sucks, but I hear what you're saying. Like the economics of it makes sense. It's weird that China would be the people that are putting out open source models that are 90% as good as the closed source models.
But I think they have different incentives, right? Their incentive is to undermine the American market with that approach, right? Like they take their open source models, flip them out against ChatGPT and say, hey, this is free and it's just as good. Use this instead.
It'll be interesting to see how things play out. If the regulatory regimes, like for example, if you end up with the state level regulations around AI, I mean, it'll grind everything to a halt. And in that case, open source is almost better because then you're not accountable for it the same way. If the feds are going to put in, and the guy who is the spokesperson for the government, David Sachs, is going to put, and what he's articulated as the intent is to put some federal guardrails in that are fairly permissive, but keep things under control. If that actually happens and the states don't have the ability to kind of become these hyper-regulatory states out of places like Illinois and California and the places that have said that they want to be that way, then yeah, I think that lends itself more towards closed models, which was actually part of the whole hubbubaloo about the AI guys getting involved in the last election, right? Because essentially what had happened was OpenAI and Anthropic had made a deal with the government to essentially say, okay, cool, you're going to just lock everybody else. You're going to put regulation and lock everybody else out, and we'll be the ones that control AI. You know, the Mark Andreessens of the world and David Saxes of the world were like, huh? No, we can't have that. There's so many different forces at play in these dynamics. So
the way I've seen it play out is the old saying, the US innovates, the EU regulates, and China imitates. And I think that applies to these models, right? And I've seen that play out with everything we're talking about, right? I don't think EU is ever going to be a major player because of all the heavy regulation that they're going to do. The US is going to do what it always does and just let people throw a ton of money at the problem. And then China is going to continue to release models like DeepSeek that are going to undermine that investment. But that's the dynamic, right?
We have these conversations in terms of, in these personal workflows where speed and that extra little 10% really compounds and makes it way better. Then being, more picky about the model makes a lot of sense. But most of the business processes that you do, one, they're asynchronous for largely, right? And sometimes you care about speed, but not often, where it like really needs speed. And that extra 10% doesn't give you anything, right? So if you go on, like for us, right, like we use Bedrock on AWS because we need something that's protected and segmented and all those different things. So if it's not on Bedrock, we can't really use it for our customers, right? And you look at their top of the line model is like Sonnet 4.5, I think, right? It's an order of magnitude or two more expensive than like the DeepSeek or Qwen models, right? And it's like, well, are we getting an order of magnitude more value? Probably not. So
not for the task
depends on
that
the use
somebody
case.
would run. Yeah, it highly depends on the use case. Is it How important is speed? That's one measure. Is how important is the token size, the input size? Because the better models are going to have a bigger input. They're going to have less hallucinations. If you're doing small summarization tasks, a very simple model is just fine. But if you're looking at something more complicated, which I can't imagine many people would need a Sonnet 4.5 to run in a place where it's not watched or not observed, or you need to have something on those. If they're using it, maybe they just want to use it and they don't need to use it because the outputs aren't going to be, I think you've mentioned this a couple of times, they're not going to be a massive shift in how well it's structured.
It's
Maybe
not a kindergartner to
No.
Shakespeare, right? Like it's not that kind of difference.
Exactly. It's just not. It might be an 11th to a 12th grader, a graduating 11th grader to an incoming senior. It's going to be slightly noticeable, but not where you would be better off spending hundreds or thousands of dollars more a month to use it. It's just not
Right.
that. It's just not that way.
But I think when you're innovating and you're creating features, like for Aptitude's clients, a lot of times they want to do stuff that's new and kind of pushes the envelope. And I think when you are looking to do something like that, you do want to use that bleeding edge model because you are going to get those incremental gains versus something that's been out for a couple of years or is open source. You need something that you can really do crazy, interesting, and innovative things with. And that's where I think you're going to get that value out of like Sonnet 4.5, Opus 4.5, GPT 5.1.
Yeah, but let me put you on the spot there, right?
Sure.
So are your customers actually really going to be able to tell the difference? If you
Yes.
push something, can they tell the difference between Model A or Model B?
Here's an important distinction. I think you need to build your apps with the ability to switch models, not necessarily on the fly, but very easily. You need to be able to adapt it in a way where there's kind of a layer between.
Well, their life
the
cycle's
apps and
so
the model.
short.
Right.
It's not, right? Like
Absolutely.
they're already deprecating models that are like less than a year old, right? Like the life cycle is so
It's-
short. You have to.
It's
do
like
that or
React
you're
Native
insane.
versions. Yeah, they drop off after a couple of months. But I think it's important to be able to switch between them. But I think the further you are in the innovation scale, the more you are going to want to be using models that are brand new because the juice in terms of what people are going to be wowed by with your app, with your product, is going to be in the newer stuff that is more innovative. Now, if you're running a back-end process that analyzes an email and determines whether there's an invoice attached to it, sure. Yeah, you don't need like the latest and greatest and stuff to do that. And that's going to be the vast case for most business use cases. But when you're doing something that's brand new and you're testing out a killer feature or you're creating an app that is kind of new to market, creating a new market, I think that's where you're going to need the brand new models.
Makes sense.
Interesting to me. One other thing to talk about, and Chris, this is really kind of pushed to you, but Jason, I'm like interested in this overall question from you as well, right? Like really curious how you're seeing AI land in mobile specifically. And then we can talk about like which kind of parts of the stack do we think the AI stuff is best at? We've talked about before, when you were here before, we were talking about, how sort of React Native had kind of won, right? Like it'd become the de facto, it was becoming sort of almost bespoke or like hyper craftsman to actually build a native app unless we were in gaming or something like that. Is that reversing the trend? Like, are you seeing mobile native come back more because of the chatbots and it's easy to ship code, or because React's so good in the bots because it's got so much to train on? It's more of that. Like, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think still, if your focus is on polish and user interface and on creating something that's very tightly coupled to the OS and the ecosystem, then you are seeing people that are looking at native again. If they can offset the cost of developers working natively on Swift, Kotlin, Jetpack Compose, Swift UI, stuff like that, it's not quite as cost prohibitive. I think people are looking back at that more. We've had people not completely write it off as much as they used to. With that said, though, I think the benefit of these tools, these agentic coding tools, have really only we're just talking about something that really only kind of hit the market in June, right? It's November. That's 5 months. So I think the full effect of having something that can write React and React Native code in 30 minutes and make a brand new website for a podcast episode that doesn't exist yet, I think the benefit of that hasn't quite hit everybody's attention yet. It all, again, depends on your use case. Like if you're still looking for something to get you to MVP quickly, then I think React Native absolutely makes the most sense. But I do know that people are looking again at doing native coding in ways that they hadn't been looking before because of things like Gemini and Claude Code and Codex.
Interesting. Do you see like any sort of meta layer happening? I've heard this kind of spec-driven design type of idea where you have a really, really, really well described pseudocode app basically. And then it's like, okay, build me the Android version, build me the iOS version. Is that actually happening or is that just sort of theoretical at this point?
It's still theoretical at this point. It's like a lot of stuff with mobile. You still, at the end of the day, have to have somebody that knows what to do when you hit build app and it fails and something goes wrong, or the app crashes, or you have a DevOps pipeline and the build fails, right? You still need people that know what's going on behind the scenes. And that still applies to even agentic coding. But it definitely is changing the landscape. You can now, instead of spending X number of thousands of dollars on product design and getting deep, deep, deep into it before you even see something, you can now, again, have an MVP, test out some ideas, test out some features, test it on your phone. I don't know, maybe $200 a month worth of investment. And that's a huge game changer for people. And I think you're going to start to see that more and more because, again, this has only been out since June in a real way. As more startups come up and start to use these tools, as these tools kind of, the enterprise stops freaking out so much about agentic coding and starts to acquiesce a little bit and realize like, okay, this isn't going away. And it's also something that we need to help our developers use as co-intelligence instead of replaced AI intelligence.
Kind of like the Google lawyers letting the Google developers use the Google model for coding.
Exactly. Wild. That was what a story. Do you know what we're talking about, Chris? Did you see this? I sent it to you, didn't I? The Sergey Brin was telling a story at like some summit, some conference, and he was telling about how the internal folks at Google, like the lawyers of risk or whomever it was, I don't remember.
Weren't allowing them to use Gemini as their own model.
Yeah, they could use Cursor and Claude and all those things, but they wouldn't let him use Gemini. Like he said he had to call up the CEO and be like, I'm not dealing with these people anymore. You need to fix this. Okay.
All the press coming out about him and Google's comeback in this, it's really quite remarkable because Sergey got approached by actually an OpenAI guy at a party. And the OpenAI guy was named Dan. And there's all this speculation about this. And nobody knows who Dan quite is, but Dan was like, dude, what are you doing? Your company is flailing in the AI game. And this is an OpenAI researcher or engineer, whoever. And that was kind of the catalyst
to Sergey. And that
was the catalyst
it's like Obama and Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in like 2013 or whatever. Yeah, no, it's just why poke the bear, man? What are you doing?
Sergey went home from that party and he was like, being driven home and he was just stewing. And he was like, I got to get back in the game. My company, we're going to save this. And then he did. And by all accounts, like if you're an engineer at Google and you're having a problem with bureaucracy, now you can like DM that dude and get your problem solved. That's huge.
I mean, I was having this conversation with somebody over the weekend, right? Because there's speculation that Tim Cook was going to retire soon or something like that. And I was like, I hadn't heard that. And somebody was sort of defending him. And the point I was making was the power of these founders in these companies, like the power of bureaucracy and entrenched interest at these big companies. I mean, we see it every day with our customers, right? Is so enormous. The credibility and almost like an authority that somebody like a Sergey or an Elon or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos and those kind of guys can speak with. Like if you think about on paper what Jobs did with the iPhone. What Jobs did with the iPhone was come in and say, we're going to do this brand new thing that no one's ever done before that hasn't really been proven. And if it goes well, it would destroy our biggest business. It'll completely take out our biggest business, which is the iPod and the Apple Music or iTunes back in the day, right? It's like on paper, nobody lets that happen, right? Like, so if you think about a place like Apple today, like how many VPs have smothered great ideas, in their infancy? Think if the VP of the iPod, or I don't know how they organize, but whatever, the division leader for the product guy that cared about the P&L of the iPod, if Jobs hadn't been there, maybe that guy or gal is powerful enough to stop the iPhone from being a thing because I don't want to cannibalize my business.
I think that shows in Apple's products, right? Have you used Apple Music lately? It's almost unusable. Like it's
bad.
It's garbage. And it's become so homogenized and there's no innovation in their products. And I do hope that Tim Cook considers retiring. As much as I love him, I think he's an operations guy. I don't think he's an innovation guy. And I think
not anymore. He's had a lot of good impacts to Apple. I don't think anybody can dispute that he's brought a lot to the company. And the company has grown a lot under his tenure there. Yeah. But it's at some point in time, it's time to say goodbye. You've had a great run. You've got a great career. Go out on a high note before it goes. Because I can see it too. It's starting to, Duncan and I, have had these conversations as well. I was a big Apple fan for a long time, but it's just starting to fade a little bit. You can start to see the cracks. You can just start to see even just starting up this podcast of the audio switch back and forth. Just a little
the stuff that
here
used
and
to
there.
be so perfect isn't perfect anymore.
It's the
Polish,
quote.
and
I would just say
starting to fade.
it just works. That's why I picked this, because it works.
You guys are being nice to Tim. Let me be the little outlier. Like, I don't think they've done anything other than collect rent for 15 years, right? Like, the only thing you could say that they've actually innovated on, like the AirPods are pretty cool, right? Like, great.
No, we're not saying they've innovated. He has grown the company though. The company has grown quite a bit.
But they don't have new they've just, their products were so good that they've just, again, this is what the guy does. These operations, these execution, and they've just executed and executed. Yeah. And they took things that were already good and are running them out their life cycle, the product life cycle.
Yes.
And they're doing the blocking and tackling, but they're not seeing the next thing. To their credit, they took a shot with the Vision Pro, and who knows why that failed? Did they fail because they didn't come with a second version? Did they not come with a second version because there was some infighting and nobody knew where to go? Or was it just not good enough? Or like, who knows what the reasons are? Like, we're not. Well, that's a part of it. My point being, they've just played it out. To use a sports analogy, there's a good game manager, right? Like, who was the quarterback when the Ravens won? When they had that killer defense, he was a good guy, solid quarterback. Had been around forever. He was like in his late 30s by the time, but it was like, you just don't screw it up. Make the nice, safe, solid throw. Don't turn the ball over. Turn around, give it to Jamal Lewis, and do your thing. And that was okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you're not Tom Brady, you're not Patrick Mahomes, you're not Josh Allen, right? Like, it's a different animal. If you've got a great running game and a great defense, and you don't make mistakes as a quarterback, you're going to win games, and you'll rack up the wins over the years. But that's not the same thing as being great.
Siri is a great example though here, right? Like, they were first to market with Siri, way ahead of anybody else, way ahead of Amazon Alexa. And they just let it die on the vine, and they didn't keep it going. They didn't innovate it. They didn't fix the problems. They didn't stay ahead of the curve. And then ChatGPT comes out, and they didn't immediately say, oh, we're going to figure this out for Siri, because this is clearly, where things are going. And now you have this useless product that should have been game changing that wasn't. And I think that's an example of where they've been at. They've been focused on operations and scale, but they haven't been focused on innovation.
And this button right here on the side of my phone, I have pushed it more times on mistake than I've ever found it useful. The usefulness of the products and the intentionality behind it is just gone. It's not so much as I want to use this because it's so much better and cleaner and polished. There's cracks. It's just not as seamless.
We're clearly all a bunch of Apple fanboys that need to get stuff off our chest. We'll save the Linux desktop app, or the year of the Linux desktop conversation for another one. But we do need to get into that. We do need to get into that a little bit, because I'm collecting machines that have Ehmke on that aren't being used, and I got to figure out what to do with them. But it's pretty cool. All right. So last thing to sort of wrap up, I wanted to kind of ask Chris, as a design studio, I can't imagine you bill by the hour a ton, right? It's mostly probably semi-fixed bid type of stuff without getting into your business. I'm sure you work with or partner or compete against people who do hourly type billing. How does that change in a world where something that might have taken you 500 to 1,000 billable hours before takes 5 or 30 minutes? How is that changing the economics of being a dev shop?
I think the important thing to note is that Aptitude, we've always billed for the asset. We always bill for the launched product. We don't bill for the hour. Certainly we've had hourly contracts, but it's more about the finished product. Where do we go from A to Z? What does the roadmap look like? So billing by the effort, while that works for some people, I think it's always been focused on, since Aptitude, from the day that I founded it, was focused mainly on design first. I think you put the focus on design and you put the focus on the finished product. Code is becoming a commodity, and craftsmanship is the premium. And that's always been our market differentiator. Focus on craftsmanship, focus on quality. And I think in anything, right? If you focus on the quality of the work, you'll never go wrong.
Interesting. We'll get into it now, but I'd love to pick how you protect yourself in that type of situation where you don't get into a million revisions and all that type of stuff. But that's for another day.
We've had projects like that before.
Yeah, for sure.
You learn over the years.
All right. What else? What have we not hit on that you guys want to talk about in terms of the AI tools and how we're using them, or how we want to use them, or any of that type of stuff?
I think I'd like to pose a question to you guys. You are using agentic coding, and you're also providing these really high value services to enterprises. Where do you guys see agentic coding helping you and what you guys are doing? And have you seen over the course of the past 6 months a change in warmth from Fortune 500 companies to these kinds of tools? Or is it still just kind of like, it's a liability landmine, we're not going to touch it?
we found value in just the quick iterations of an idea. It's idea, instead of explaining it in a PRD or a document, or it's just we'll just put a mock together. What do you think? And start iterating during a meeting. Like, okay, change this to this. We can iterate on an idea or a mock so much faster than we ever could before.
That's wild.
And instead of taking a whole day, okay, I'll take all these changes that you put, and I'll come back tomorrow or next week or 2 weeks from now. No, I'll do that now. I'll just burn a couple minutes talking about something, put it into the prompt, refresh the page, and it's just done. It is that fast. And so now we can iterate, make decisions, and we can validate an assumption. Say, well, okay, it used to be an investment to try something new. Hours of time, weeks of development, and now it's in production. What do we think? I don't like it. It's not quite right. And now you got to go back to the drawing board because you don't see real data anymore. But now we can validate those assumptions in minutes instead of weeks.
Yeah.
So we can say this doesn't work. This doesn't look good. I was doing that this morning with our dev team, is saying that before I'd feel terrible by saying, well, now that we've been staring at this for a little while, it's just not hitting right anymore. But now I don't feel bad anymore. Yeah, it's a little rework, but it's not a big deal. It's not like we are throwing out weeks of work because
like the code's less precious. Yeah.
And so now we can say, what do we think of this? Like, hold on, let me check it. And sometimes our developer will have a pull request done by the end of the meeting because he's a multitasking crazy person. It's just those problems are not problems anymore. We can make quicker decisions. We can challenge our own assumptions faster. We can make our product iteratively faster to market. We can be more honest instead of holding back. Like, well, that's going to be 4 weeks of work, and that sounds like an MVP 4. No. It's an hour of a prompt. That's now in the MVP
true.
1.
That's a really good point. We've pulled a lot more features into our MVP as a result of it. We're a lot more baked because the cost to bring stuff in is lower. I mean, if anything, I would say, like, I agree with everything Jason just said. What's interesting is I haven't quite figured out the workflow to make things great. What do I mean by that, right? So he mentioned like the feedback loop. The tolerance for waiting for someone to go it for days and then come back with days or weeks and come back with something. We've got some really great designers we work with. It's really hard to work with them now. They're not as embedded. They're kind of independent. And so it's like, okay, I've got this idea and I talked to them about the idea. Now I have to wait till they can have the time to do it and sit down and like come back with something. Whereas I'll just talk to a bot and have like a 50% as good or 75% as good idea. And then it's like, okay, yeah, but the other person can come up with something better eventually, but it takes so much longer. And then the iterations, and it's like, we're talking about weeks and weeks to get to something, or we can have like something kind of 75% as good. I think where we're sort of landing is we come up with the kind of 75, 80% version. We get it into alpha, beta state. To Jason's point, we see all the things wrong with it. We continue to iterate there. We get an extra 10% of quality out of it. And then maybe we have a designer come and sort of audit it afterwards and be like, all right, if you do this and you thought about, you didn't think about this flow and that type of stuff. That's probably where we're going to end up in terms of like our sort of repeated process. It's hard to fit a designer into the feedback loops now because they're so tight and they're so fast.
And because usability. Usability is always the hardest thing to get right. You can have an amazing design. It can be the most beautiful thing in the world, but using it is terrible. But you don't know that until you sometimes get hands-on. You get people, there's usability studies for a reason. I don't think those are going to go away. I think you'll start to see them augmented by an agent. I tried this with OpenAI's browser. It wasn't quite there yet, but I think you'll get some assisted, usability and say, how many clicks does it take to get from here to here? How is this? You won't get that subjective, this is what I think about it. You'll get some very objective feedback of what things could be. So I think that step will be there for a long time because you still need to know, what does a human think of it? You can't fully replicate a human's opinion in an agent. Humans think randomly. They get distracted on something and now like, oh, now this is hard to use because I was distracted. So you'll still have to have that step. But now we can get to the point where we can get some hands on it much, much faster to Duncan's point, getting it to that 80%. Chunk away that last 20% in multiple phases by getting a professional in there, getting some hands on it to give us that feedback. Getting to that point faster is where you see a lot of value.
I mean, it's always been the case, right? Like the last 10% is always the hardest of every product.
Right.
Yeah, no matter what.
And so the thing is now we've shortened, I mean, not that the last 10% hasn't been made easier too, but we've definitely shortened the first 80, 90%. Like that's a fraction of the effort that it used to be.
I don't even know how to estimate anymore. I'll be fair. Like I have no idea. We used to give estimates that used to be a week. Like, oh no, sorry, it's I'm actually done.
I'm done
right
with
now.
this before the meeting that we're describing. yeah. I mean,
I think
instead of taking notes, I can just put it into the prompt. I don't take notes. I just say, here's what needs to happen
into the prompt. Design hasn't had the same epoch change that coding has yet. But I think that'll happen somehow. Like to your point, Jason, you're always going to have humans designing better than everybody else because humans are unique creatures and it's next to impossible to have somebody design for the human eye. But I think there will be some sort of epoch change with stuff like Figma. It'll get better and better.
Make has gotten better. I liked it when it first came out, but it was slow and kind of clunky and everything looked the same. It was the same like kind of Tailwind theme. For whatever reason, spun something up in it like a couple days ago. And I was like, oh, this is way better. I'm going to start using it again.
I think there's going to be a mid-journey for design. I just watched the video today where somebody said Gemini 3 is that moment. I don't know if I agree with that yet, but I know Gemini 3 is very impressive when it comes to design. But I do think you have tools that will enable co-intelligence, the way we're talking about with coders, using agentic coding, not replacing them, but just using those tools to become far more productive, far faster. I think you'll get the same thing with design. It just hasn't happened yet. Hell, maybe Apple will design the tool, right? Because they're such a design-centric company, or used to be.
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Awesome. What else? Anybody? Chris, you doing anything fun for Christmas?
What am I doing for Christmas? Man, we had such a great honeymoon in Greece.
You have to ask the boss now. You don't make decisions anymore.
No, but I think we're just excited about like being married and are you guys familiar with the concept of fuga? It's like, fireplace, cozy, stuff like that. And we're big on that around the holiday season. So for Christmas, we're definitely going to try and do some fuga.
How sweet.
Very nice. Very
yeah.
cute. Joe, you going to frame that too? You going to get like a picture?
I'm going to get a big AI-generated fuga.
AI-generated
and
white
frame
picket
it
fence
and give it to her for
everything.
Christmas.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thanks everybody for putting up with us. And Chris, thanks for joining. It was great to chat again.
Absolutely. Best podcast episode ever.com.
.com. Exactly. It'll be interesting to come back in 3 months and everything's different and see how right or wrong we were about any of this. But
that's the one thing about
do a
AI.
side-by-side comparison of this
all the time.
Like, what was the prediction and what was the outcome?
Yeah, we'll have the AI do it. It'll be good. Chris can make a website. It'll be fun.
There you go. Make the best episode ever 2.com.
There we go. Thanks,
Cheers.
John.
Thanks, boys. Talk to you soon.